I think you want to come to the end of this year and be able to look back and go, I did that well. I think you want to come to the end of the next 5 years, 10 years, the end of your life, and be able to look back and say, I did that with a good sense of meaning and purpose. There was a value to my life that impacted others in a positive way. I genuinely believe you carry that within your soul. I also believe that there can be some lies that come our way that would sabotage that effort. I've been a pastor for over 25 years. I'm a chaplain in the United States Navy. And here's some of the things I've heard people say in my office, in passing, after a service I've led, on the deck plates of ships, that I believe are actually sabotaging them from finding the purpose that God has for them. So one is this. I hear people say, well, I want to pick my purpose. You don't get to pick your purpose. That turns purpose into a consumer choice, which that's not its function. Another is, well, my purpose should make me feel happy. Your purpose is, the objective is not to give you some transient feeling. It's not there to serve as a vehicle to maximize your sense of comfort and pleasure and safety. It's not its purpose. It's not the purpose of purpose. Another is, my purpose has to be big and it has to be important. Well, who determines that? The minute you say that, you actually give control to other people to validate whether or not your purpose is big and important enough. And then the fourth lie I see is that, well, my purpose is lost when I fail. Your purpose is not lost when you fail, when you sin, when you come short. It's not, because that means your performance is dictating whether or not you're living with a sense of purpose, which is not what the scriptures teach. What I want to cover today is how you can live a life with meaning, purpose, and values. Welcome to This Resilient Soul, a podcast where we focus on the past, anticipate the future, and discover what God is up to today. I'm Milo Curtis, and I'm thrilled that you are here with me today, walking through this idea of what does it look like to live with a sense of purpose. Now, I am just scratching the surface on what this could look like today, but I think if you kind of lean in, you're going to get some really good thoughts and maybe some nuggets that you can walk with today, this week, this month, that can shape the rest of this year. Because I believe this year could be a great year for you. It could be a defining year for you. But it's going to be filled with some challenges, some unforeseen obstacles, perhaps even some unforeseen opportunities. And how you understand your sense of purpose is going to dictate how you overcome those challenges and obstacles, how you steward those opportunities well. Within the Navy, we define spiritual readiness as the strength of spirit that enables the warfighter to accomplish the mission with honor. It is the will to fight and the ability to overcome adversity in the moment of combat or crisis. Living with that deep sense of purpose ingrained within your soul helps you navigate the chaos that can take place around you. And right now I'm doing this kind of general series on how do we prepare ourselves well for this year? How do we position ourselves to be spiritually ready for what's coming our way? Now, I firmly believe in my soul, and I've seen this lived out in my life, and as I've had the chance to be mentored by men of God that have followed Christ into really, really chaotic and harrowing circumstances, and people that I've read about, the stories I even see within Scripture, one of the things I find is this, that the quality of your life's purpose is revealed after the storm and not before it. The quality of your purpose is going to be revealed after the storm, not before it. So we're talking about doing some work in the area of purpose that won't be immediately evident, which makes this topic a difficult one to lean into because the results aren't as tangible as maybe we wish they were, but they will be tangible on the other side of the storm. When we say purpose, what do I mean by that? I mean, it's your reason for why you do what you do. What is behind that? What is the driving force? What is the motivating factor behind the purpose of your life? Why does this matter? Well, it matters because the lasting change, right now you're making changes. You're making decisions that I imagine you want to see play out well into the future. And that lasting change has to be aligned with God's divine purpose. So if you really want to embrace the change that God has for you and be the person you're wanting to be, it has to be aligned with His divine purpose, not just some imaginations of your mind. Not defining your purpose ends up creating a vacuum as well. And so if you don't sit down and really think about this, then you will just through osmosis in our culture start to adopt the purpose that other people think you should be living by. And that can come from romantic interests, that can come from coaches, mentors, managers, bosses, ministers, other people that may have good intention, but they're imposing something on me that may be outside of what God has for me. And so I need to understand within my soul, what is it that God is calling me to? What is the purpose of my life? What is He asking me to step into? And then knowing your purpose will expose the temptations that are going to come your way and how you can prepare yourself to overcome those temptations. Because the temptations are to distract you from the business God has for you. Let me say that again. The temptations exist to distract you from the business God has for you. And so your role and responsibility in getting a clear sense of purpose is then you can also begin to identify where your temptations will exist, because they'll serve as distractions away from God's best. And then knowing God's purpose for your life is also going to expose the opportunities that exist. Things that you hadn't really thought about because maybe you were so narrowly focused on one thing that you sort of created there some blind spots and you weren't able to see what was taking place. But if I open my aperture and kind of have a better understanding of what my purpose is, then you're going to be able to see opportunities that exist that wouldn't have otherwise existed. I remember distinctly, like in my life, every time I think about that point, I remember one time my dad's a general contractor and I was working for him at the time, and we were converting an old restaurant into a bank. And so it was in a retail location, remodel. And we were about to begin demolition on Monday of that facility, take out everything that wasn't relevant to the space so that we could begin building in everything that was going to be relevant to the bank. And so I was talking to my dad about it, and I said, hey, I'm going to grab the work truck, and on Saturday I'm going to go to the location and see if there's any cabinets that are in this old restaurant that I could take home with me. And I was looking for stainless steel cabinets. I was looking for some good hardy cabinets that I could put in my garage. Like a garage with good cabinets where you can store stuff and, square away things and just organize your tools in a manner that's like, just feels good. So you know where everything is when you're working on a project. It's like a vision I've always had, and I have yet to achieve it, but I'm getting a little bit closer. That's what I had in my mind, a way of improving our home so I could be more productive and more effective. And so I get to the location and unlock. I'm the only one there. It's a Saturday. I got the work truck with me, and I'm walking through the space, and I realize there's no cabinets. The little bit of cabinets that were there were blown out. They were just particle board. They had been, it had swollen because of moisture. It was just a bunch of garbage. It was all doomed for the dumpster. And I started to leave. Actually, I left the building, locked it back up, got in the truck, and I had this thought. I thought I should go back in and see if there's anything else. Because I was so narrowly focused on looking for cabinets that I didn't pay attention to anything else in the facility. So I went back in, began to look around, and I saw two pieces that could serve as wall art for our home. In fact, one of the pieces was this big giant window that was out of an old barn. And it was like kind of that old barn wood. What we ended up doing is I got it home, and this thing was big. It's like 4.5 feet tall by maybe 6.5 feet wide. I loaded it up onto the truck. I took it home, looked at it with the wife, and she says, what do you think? And I said, I think that there's this kind of big blank section, and then these kind of two smaller panel sections where like the small windows would be that could open and close. I think what I want to do is all made out of like rustic barnwood. I said, what I want to do is for the big section, I want us to draw a map of the world, and on the two smaller panel sections, I want us to list the continents. And then what we ended up doing with that big world and the two smaller continents is we put that big frame up in our living room, and we drew all of the missionaries we knew around the world on it. And then in the two smaller sections, it would say like North America is Monday. So we would pray for our minister friends that were in North America on Monday. And then Tuesday was South America, and Wednesday was Europe, and Thursday was Africa. And you get the point. And the idea was that we would use this as a prompt with our kids, who were like 4 and 6 at the time, as a way to be able to prompt them with the geography of the world based upon the relational connections we had. Okay, why do I share that? I share that to say this. The purpose of why I went there was to enrich the furnishings of our household. Now, in my mind, I had pictured cabinets. So I had to kind of step back from that and go like, wait, there could be other things here that could enrich our household, enrich the way we live our lives. And that's when I was able to find this other thing. My point is this: when you live with a deep sense of what your purpose is, you're going to be able to see other opportunities that exist. In fact, that big frame that we have in our house is still in our house. We've had that for the last 15 years, and it's moved with us all over the United States. It moved to us with Europe when I was stationed over there. It's back here in the United States. It's in our living room right now. If you've ever been in our home since 2011, you've seen this painting or this display. Why does all this matter? How does this play into our sense of purpose? Well, I think when you live with a sense of how do I genuinely find God's purpose, it's good to kind of break it down into two categories. First category is this: there's a general sense of purpose. And that is, as the Westminster Confession says, man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. Another kind of missionary evangelical phrase I've heard that I've kind of lived by myself, that I've kind of worked into my own soul, is the chief end of man is to know God and to make him known. So that's kind of a general purpose, right? You and I should live with that kind of end in mind. That is going to be true for everyone. There's some things that Jesus laid out, like love your neighbor as yourself. I don't need to determine if that's for me or not. Like, that's for all of us, right? So there's these general purposes that we need to be living by. But then there's some specific purpose that is specific to my context and my circumstance. It's specific to the people I'm working with and the team I'm on and the responsibilities I carry and the family that I have and the gifts and talents that I have and the experiences that I've had in the past that have shaped who I am. And how can all of that serve a very specific purpose? When I was in Spain, I preached pretty regularly at the Protestant service we had on base. And at this, we kind of generically called it the Protestant service because it wasn't the Catholic service. And so at the Protestant service, we would have everybody from Presbyterians to Pentecostals, Baptists to Assemblies of God, Reformed, Calvinists to Wesleyan Arminians. Like the spectrum of theology was pretty well represented within that service. And regularly, I remember challenging myself and challenging that congregation that I had a chance to serve, that it is healthy for us to recognize that under normal circumstances, we would not go to the same church with one another. If we lived in the States, we would all find churches that met our denominational preferences, desires, tastes. But because we were in Spain and because we were one of, I think, 4 English-speaking services within a 30-mile radius, it sort of limited people's options of what was available. And so because of that, we had a pretty robust and healthy congregation there in Spain. And so I would routinely ask the question, why has God seen fit that this group of people be in Spain now for such a time as this? What is our responsibility? What is God's purpose in all of this that we need to be pressing into? So when I talk about purpose, there's a sense of general purpose and specific purpose, and both need to be cultivated in our life. I think most of us have a good sense of what the general purpose is. Like, that's not necessarily fuzzy. Probably where many of us struggle is, what's that deeper sense of specific purpose? What is the expression of that general purpose in light of the family I'm in, or the team I'm on, or the command I've been assigned to, or the responsibilities I carry, the skills I have? In the Gospel of Matthew and Luke, we get the Sermon on the Mount. And in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus lays out sort of a manifesto of what his kingdom is supposed to be about. And I'm not going to take the time to go through all of it. But what I'm going to do is highlight how he ends it. And in Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 through 27, we find these words. Jesus says, "Everyone then who hears these words of mine." So he's just been preaching a lot about a lot of different topics about how we need to be connecting with God, how we need to be connecting with one another, where those responsibilities lay. Essentially, what does it look like to live a life of purpose, to seek first the kingdom of God, as Jesus says? How do we do that? What does that look like? What should be the expectations I carry in living that out? What is my sense of purpose? So Jesus then, he's wrapping up that kind of series of teachings. He says, "Everyone then who hears these words," what I've just said, "everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house. But it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall." I think this really highlights the importance of knowing what our purpose needs to be and how we establish that well. So as I move through this life, as you move through this life, we carry our responsibilities. How do we carry them in a way that builds the life of purpose that God wants me to have, that God wants me to honor him with? Okay, first, I'm going to walk through 4 things. First is this: know the expectations, develop the relationships. Know the expectations, develop the relationships. So how do I build a quality purpose? First, I know the expectations, and I develop the relationships. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 7, verse 24, he said, "Everyone who hears these words of mine." The question is, are you listening to what Jesus has for you? What's fascinating is, he says, everyone who hears this. He's not asking everyone who hears this and can afford it, everyone who hears this and has come from a good family, everyone who hears this and has a lot of good skills and talents and abilities, everyone who hears this who's intelligent, or everyone who hears this that's free and not a slave. He doesn't put any conditions upon it. He says, if you hear this, you have everything you need to live a life of purpose. If you'll really sit down and pay attention to what I'm calling you to, you'll understand, which means it divorces anyone who reads that passage of scripture, and with the original hearers, anyone who's paying attention and listening, hearing what he had to say, it divorces them of any sort of victim mentality. So moving forward, everything is based upon, am I responding to what Jesus has told me? Which means I need to know what the expectations are, but I need to develop the relationship. I need to develop a relationship with God where I'm listening to what he has to say. If I listen, I'll get a deep sense of what that purpose is supposed to be. Let me share with you 2 things, and I'm going to illustrate it. Expectations give clarity. Relationships give meaning. Principles show what's right. People show what matters. So imagine this. It's your first day checking into a command. All right, day 1, you show up, you walk in, you're going through your check-in process, and your final check-in is with the CO. And you sit down with the CO, and the CO articulates what your role is, what your responsibilities are, what authorities you have, how much risk he's willing for you to take, and how much risk he wants you to kick up to him. Right? So you're getting a sense of what your left and right lateral limits are. So all of that is made incredibly clear. It is not fuzzy what right and wrong look like. But as you're sitting there, he says, any questions? You say no, you get up and you leave, but you don't know anybody within the life of the command. Maybe you've been there. I know I've been there. And there's a kind of a sense of like, I know what right looks like, I don't know how to develop this. I don't know why this matters. Some of these things that aren't just kind of general Navy best practices, there's some things that seem very specific to here. Is that because of the mission? Is that because of problems that have existed in the past? Is that because of the nature of the platform I'm on? Like, why? What is the why? What's behind all of this? And if you don't have any relationships, you kind of leave wondering. It's not that the seal wasn't clear, and it's not that you don't have a good sense of what the right and left lateral limits are. It's that there's no relational connection. Now you invert that, right? So imagine the person you walk into that meeting and you sit down with the CO and he walks through all of these things with you, like what his policies are, what he expects of you, what authority you carry, all those things, right? He walks with you through all of those things, but in the room with you is your direct report. And when you leave, it's not just that you heard things that were clear. Now you have a relationship that you can look to get a sense of meaning, to get a sense of understanding why this matters. So building a sense of quality purpose isn't just about knowing what the expectations are. It's about developing the relationship. And I personally believe that first, obviously, it begins with the Lord. I just don't need to know what God says. My question is, do you have a relationship with the Lord? Does that describe your lifestyle? And if it does, I imagine you're also looking at how can I invite others into my life that can help me understand this, get clarity on this. Maybe in some regards, the reason why you're listening to this podcast is because you and I have that kind of relationship, that you're looking for this to help bring clarity, this podcast to bring some clarity into your life on how to have a resilient soul. My point is this, is that it's not enough to just know what to do or even to do it right. It has to happen within the context of relationships. Jesus said, everyone who hears these words of mine. The second thing is Jesus says, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them. So it's not enough just to hear it, know it. The question is, do you do it? Do you understand what God is asking of you? So if I'm going to build a life of purpose, like quality purpose in my life, I need to cultivate a bias for action, not a bias for agreement. I need to cultivate a bias for action, not a bias for agreement. Jesus is not interested in you agreeing with him. He doesn't need you to agree with him. He does not need that kind of affirmation. That is not your role. That is not your responsibility. What he wants you to do is he wants you to trust him. And the way you express that trust is by doing what he told you to do, by taking the step that needs to be taken. The really practical way you can identify if you're doing this or not is you can link your purpose, your sense of purpose, to your calendar and your budget. And I'm being explicit with that because these are usually things that we can measure. I can see how I'm spending my time and I can see how I'm spending my money. And do these reflect someone who is living with that sense of general purpose, right? Knowing God and making him known, or glorifying God and enjoying him all my days, that general sense of purpose, or that specific sense of purpose. Like, no, this is what he's called me to do. These are the responsibilities I'm to carry. These are the people I'm called to serve. These are the gifts, skills, talents, and abilities he's asked me to steward, right? So how am I taking all of that and aiming it in a way that can be seen in my calendar and budget? I know a lot of people who claim to be followers of Christ, but if you were to look at either one of those things, you would not be led to that conclusion. So how are you spending your time? Can you see that? Like, when are you reading your Bible? When are you praying? When are you going to service? When are you spending time with Christian brothers and sisters? When are you serving for causes that are outside of yourself? When are you reading and studying and learning and getting better as a person so that you can steward the resources well? When are you getting together with friends and mentors and people you're mentoring so that you can come alongside them and serve them well, or be served by them well, so that you can draw closer to Christ, right? Does this make sense? So the idea is, what am I doing with my calendar and my budget to make those things happen. And then one of the things I would encourage you to do is, like, I've started journaling. I've been journaling for about 4 years now. And one of the things I've been really diligent with is I've been trying to record my progress, not my promises. Recording my progress, not my promises. I should keep my promises, absolutely. But sometimes we have a tendency to say, I will, Lord, I promise, Lord, this will happen, Lord, I'm going to be obedient, Lord. So we make these kind of vague promises. Cool. Really glad, man. But what about the progress? Are you doing that? Are you doing what Jesus told you to do? Generally and specifically. Like, the question isn't, how good are you at making promises? How good are you at telling others that you're making promises? The question is, how good are you at making progress? Third, I prioritize removing before adding. It's interesting, in the Gospel of Luke, he tells the same story, but a little bit different. Luke's recording is a little bit different. In Luke's recording, it says, the man that built his house upon the rock, he says, he is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock. And as I was reflecting on this, one of the things I found to be true in my life is that sometimes building quality purpose means I start removing before I start adding. There's a lot more removal than addition. And generally speaking, as Americans, we are not good at this. We are really good at addition. We are not very good at subtraction. Removing things from our life oftentimes is perceived as a loss. And I want to challenge that, because there may be some things in your life that are just not good for you right now. They're just no bueno. And then there's some things that were good for a season, but no more. So here's, again, it's a really simple way to think about this. And I heard this organization technique years ago where they said, everybody's got a junk drawer in their kitchen. And the best way to organize your junk drawer is just to take it out and dump everything out, put it back in its place, and then only put in the junk drawer what you need. Sometimes we invert that. We'll open the junk drawer and we'll start looking for what we need to remove instead of focusing on what we need to keep. So one way to approach this is to imagine if you were to start your life completely over, like day one, from scratch, right now. What would you need right now to live the life of purpose that God has for you? So that means all of a sudden there's all these things I need to assess that are probably going to be removed from our life. And I'm actually personally in the process of walking through this. And I was sharing this the other day with my wife, Bethany, and thinking through, okay, what are some things that I need to start removing? And I think I know what some of those things are. It's not that they're wrong or sinful or bad. It's just, I think that time and season is over. So what will I use? That's a great question, right? Because you're focusing on, do I still have use of this today? In light of the responsibilities I carry and the way I need to be living this purpose now, what do I need to accomplish that? Then you ask, well, what will I give? Because there's some things you may have, and I'm talking about like physical things in your possession, that they're good things, but they're not good for you anymore. They serve as a distraction. They're sucking some mental and emotional and energy bandwidth away from you living with a clear sense of purpose. And so these things still have value, but they're not valuable to you. They don't add value to your life anymore. And so you can give them to somebody else. You can maybe sell them, or you can give them to a cause, or you can give them to a friend who could use it better, right? So what will I use? What will I give? Third is, what will I toss? What is that stuff that's just, it has no business in my life anymore? And actually, it has no business in anybody else's life. These are things that just might be wrong. Some things that are in your possession that you don't need to be hanging on to anymore. They should not hold any sort of sense of nostalgia for the former life that you held or that you had. They're just junky, right? They take way more than what they give. And it's actually a type of corrosion for your soul. It's sabotaging your ability to have clarity around God's purpose for your life. So you just need to get rid of it. And you don't need to be thinking about selling it on Facebook Marketplace or, finding a place that you can, make some money out. Just stop. Walk out to the dump, to the trash can, just throw it away. Get rid of it. Be done with it. Move on. Okay? So there's things I will use, there's things I will give, there's things I'll toss, and then there's things I'll store. Like there's some things in your life that they don't serve a purpose for you right now, but it doesn't mean they're wrong. It doesn't mean they won't serve a purpose in the future. So you kind of want to hang on to those things. And so you want to store them. You want to hang on to them for a period of time because there may be value in these things, or you can imagine value in these things for a different season. And I know being in the military, perhaps you're in the military, sometimes we move around quite a bit. And there's sort of this purging process we do every time we PCS. And so this kind of naturally built into how we are and how we operate. But I also know that for some of us, we're not very good at that. It's just easier to bring in the movers and just let them pack up everything and I'll sort it out later. And so I keep saying, I'll sort it out later. I'll sort it out later. Meanwhile, I end up with just moving a bunch of stuff around that is not serving any particular focus. Okay, fourth. So I'm talking about building a quality purpose, right? So the first was know the expectations, develop the relationships. The second was cultivate a bias for action, not a bias for agreement. The third was prioritize removing before adding. And then fourth is embrace the hidden work God is calling you to. It's interesting because there's this digging down to the foundations that have to be done. There's this removal that has to take place to get down to the foundations that will allow the person to build a life that's stable, to build a life that will last through the storms. As I said, my dad's a general contractor, and one summer I worked out at the Persimmon Country Club golf course in Oregon. Beautiful, beautiful golf course. And we were building a massive addition to their country club with a banquet center. And it was huge. And it had this big, giant, basement as part of it. And so when I was there during the summer, we were laying the foundations for that basement. We were building the concrete walls for that basement. And when I left to go back, this was during college, when I left to go back to college, that's how things were when I left. Everything was sort of at this sort of concrete level. The following summer, my girlfriend from college came out and visited me, and I said, hey, I want to show you what I worked on last summer. So I drove her out to the country club because by this point it was finished. And I was showing her around and how fancy it was and nice and things. And I knew some of the owners, folks that worked there. And so they allowed me to kind of have access to different parts of the building, even though I wasn't an employee, but they knew who I was. And so as I was walking them around the facility, or walking Bethany around the facility, my girlfriend at the time, I walked her down to the basement and I was showing her this concrete wall. I'm like, I helped pour this concrete wall. Now this thing is in a part of the building that nobody accesses. It's not part of the guest service experience at all. It's from the exterior, it's completely buried. Okay. It's hidden. But if that doesn't exist, the country club doesn't exist. Right? All the fancy things, all the nice things, all the stuff that you want to host and serve guests well with, don't lay on a strong foundation apart from the work that had happened that summer prior. My point to you is this. There's a lot of work that goes into developing the purpose God has for your life that will get buried. And no one's going to know it's there until the storm comes. And it's going to be on the other side of the storm that you're going to realize, oh, that's why it's there. Richard Foster said this, it is the renovation of the heart we are after in spiritual formation. This inward work is much harder than mere outward conformity. It is harder because we cannot see it, test it, or control it. The house that was built on sand collapsed because there was no hidden work. There was nothing that anchored it during the storm. I want you to dig deep. I want you to live a life with deep purpose, that no matter where you're at, no matter where God takes you, no matter what circumstances you find yourself in, you have a clear sense of what that general purpose is, and you have a sense of, and you may be learning it, but you have a sense what that specific purpose is. Why? Because you're choosing to not just know the expectations, but you're developing the relationship with God and with his people. You're cultivating a bias for action, not just a bias for agreement. You're prioritizing removing before adding, and you are embracing the hidden work that God is calling you to. I hope this has been an encouragement to you. I really want you to live with a deep sense of meaning, purpose, and values. I want you to be spiritually ready for the work that God has for you. I want you to be able to accomplish the mission with honor, that no matter what chaos erupts around you, that you are able to stay the course and be the person that God has called you to be. And I hope you'll get into conversation with other folks about this. I hope this is not just a private journey for you. I pray that you have conversations with folks about these things. And maybe this has been a benefit to you. On Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, I'm posting shorts that are excerpts from this podcast that highlight how we do this well. Kind of little bite-sized nuggets from the podcast. If you see those, share them, like them, comment on them. That helps kind of generate traffic and lets others hear this content if it's of value to you. And I pray it is. I really feel in my heart I'm supposed to be doing this right now, and so I'm praying through that. And if you have any ideas on how I can do this better, on ways that I can improve this, I welcome that feedback. I've already received some from some trusted sources, and I'd love to put you into that mix and hear from you. So I pray that you stay in touch. I pray that you use this well, and I pray that you go with God and be at peace.